Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining me for these weekly updates of what's happening or not on Capitol Hill. I got three items at the top, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. First was the Senate Intelligence Committee had what will be the first in a series of open hearings on the potential for foreign interference in our national elections this year. As someone who, from the Intelligence Committee, led the bipartisan investigation for when Russia massively intervened in 2016, our committee has continued to monitor this. And I have to tell you that with less than 6 months before the election, I'm worried. I'm worried that other nation states, not just Russia, but Russia, China, Iran, and potentially others, know that it is relatively easy and relatively cheap to interfere in our elections. We've seen a report as recently as just yesterday of not necessarily a deep fake with AI tools, but a fake video claiming that Ukraine was somehow helping Biden and being attributed to the CIA. As the CIA quickly rebutted, this was absolutely false. It was actually came from a known Russian group. But I think we will see more of that from a variety of nation states going forward. So the fact that it's cheap is a challenge. Second is just the fact that Americans of all political stripes are much more willing to believe wild conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, so many Americans don't trust anything from the federal government. So that means that it is a target-rich environment to spread disinformation. Third is that we have seen many of the social media platform companies, frankly, not do enough, and in many ways retreat from even what they did in 2020 in terms of having individuals meet their own user requirements. We've seen certain companies like Twitter basically get rid of any of the content moderation. We've seen other platforms that have dramatically cut back on the personnel that were used to deal with disinformation. And four, we've got the challenge of artificial intelligence. A lot of this is focusing on deep fakes, the ability to create a video or audio of an individual that is completely false but appears real. So what you see or even what you hear is not fully believable. We've seen two examples of that already, where in the primary season there was a fake picture of President Trump appearing to hug Dr. Fauci. We saw as well a video robocall supposedly from President Biden around the New Hampshire primary, putting out wrong information. We've got to make sure that we work as aggressively as we can to educate Americans about this threat, to have them be able to take a pause or take a beat if something seems a little out of line. And then the federal government, and this is what the focus of the hearing was yesterday, needs to do a clearer job of when they have proof that this is a false piece of information or a deep fake. They need to aggressively get that information out. And one of the things that we need to focus on, who does that? I mean, in a political campaign where you've got an incumbent president running against a former president, if the White House themselves says this is fake, it may not carry as much weight. So I actually think the model that took place late in the 2020 campaign, where there were Iranian actors pretending to be Proud Boys putting out disinformation, it was literally the Trump administration had their director of national intelligence, the head of the FBI, the head of CISA, all come out jointly and clear that out. We need that same kind of senior level aggressive leaning in, particularly as we get closer to the election, to make sure that Americans are informed when foreign governments are basically messing with our elections. We've got enough differences between Americans. We don't need foreign governments amplifying that, or in many cases, as we saw in 2016, potentially trying to drive Americans literally to violence against each other. Part of that effort is, as well as the public hearings that will take place, is the artificial intelligence companies, and this includes all of the social media companies, but also companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, all agreed, 20 of them agreed to a compromise or an accord at the Munich Security Conference. And I was part of that effort to push these companies into that accord, where they said, since half the world is going to be voting this year, not just America. Matter of fact, there's elections in India right now in June. There'll be elections across the European Union for their EU Parliament. These 20 companies all said that they would collaborate to make sure that if there is altered political content coming out, deep fakes, that they would be watermarked or identified as being modified, that they would work together to take down that content, and they'd work together to try to educate the public, not just in America, but elsewhere. The challenge has been, and I wrote all those 20 companies this week, you promised us that in February. Where's the beef? Where's the action? Where's the activity? I mentioned we've got elections going on right now in India. We've got major elections in Europe coming in June, and we've already seen, for example, in the Czech Republic and Belgium, leaders in those countries point out Russia's trying to interfere in their elections. We saw the political violence that took place in Slovakia just yesterday. So I expect these companies to be coming forward with answers on how are they going to meet what they promised they would do at the meeting in Munich in February. It's one of the reasons why, as well, yesterday, the Rules Committee, in terms of deep fakes and AI in elections, and I was proud to vote in favor of this, says we need to go beyond simply voluntary agreements from these tech companies. We need legal guardrails to have this in place, and we put forward legislation yesterday that's bipartisan that would act on that. And I'd point out, literally 14 states around the country, from very conservative states to more liberal states, have already taken action to try to prohibit deep fakes in our political campaigns. So this is an issue that you're going to hear a lot more from me about over the coming weeks and months, and it's something that we need to, all of us, regardless of where we fall on the political agenda, need to take extraordinarily seriously. Second issue is I was one of the leaders to try to make sure that America met its commitment to Ukraine. I'm proud we are doing that, and I'm proud those arms are flowing. But as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, we've got to speed those up, because the Russians are pressing certain advantages they have around Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. They're pressing some additional offense in the Donbass. Ukraine is caught with not having enough arms. We need to continue to send those arms. And frankly, they're going through a conscription process. Since Russia's got so many larger population, frankly, Ukraine needs to go ahead and, with instituting a draft, bring more people into their armed services so that so they can push back Russian aggression. It's again, I can't think of an issue that will have longer-term global negative impacts than if Vladimir Putin is to be successful in Ukraine. That will add fire to Iran's mischief in the Middle East. It'll add fire, and Putin is in China today visiting President Xi, add more impetus to President Xi's aggressive potential actions towards the island of Taiwan. Final issue, and this was something I talked about last week. It was real time, but unfortunately, we did not even get a vote on the addition of the 5 flights at National Airport in the Senate. I think the forces who wanted to frankly make it easier for themselves to go home knew that we would win that vote, just as what had happened in the House when this was put to a vote. And the members said, no, we ought to take safety in consideration. No, we don't want to provide or exacerbate further delays at Reagan National. And it was, I was very disappointed with the process. They basically ran out the clock, and no amendments at all were voted on. And I hope and pray that we don't have another safety incident at Reagan National. But I will say this, as people's delays at National, and remember the long runway at National is the busiest single runway in America. And about 90% of all the traffic now uses that runway. The shorter runways where we used to have prop planes or commercial or general aviation planes, since GA planes don't fly into National anymore, and since there's so few prop planes, all of that traffic is on that one runway. 22% of the flights at National are already delayed, about an average of 67 minutes. Next time for the DMV traveling public, you're sitting at National and you're an hour or 2 hours delayed. I hope you'll remember which of those senators ended up not giving our region even a chance to have a vote. I also want to thank so many of the Virginia House members who ended up voting, as I did, voting against the FAA bill, even though it was an important bill, because of this, I think, frankly, cheap effort. Every time in the past, we've either made a compromise on this issue or we've had a vote. Matter of fact, we offered I thought, a very fair compromise last week where we said, okay, you can add the new flights, but only if the Secretary of Transportation certifies no safety issue, no delay, no cancellations. That's what the advocates had said. You could add those flights without any of those issues. We said, well, let's give it to the experts. And unfortunately, we didn't even get a vote there. So sorry to go on that one, but it was to think back a couple of weeks ago when I ended up getting my FISA 702 bill through, the TikTok bill through, and the Ukraine aid, to go from that to the disappointment of last week not even getting a vote, which I think we would have won on the FAA, shows a little bit of the roller coaster of this job at times. But with that, let me go ahead and throw it over to Laura and be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question will be Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Good afternoon. Thanks a lot, as always, for joining us. Wanted to follow on your hearing this week. Do you think there is a hesitancy of federal agencies and social media companies to quickly identify these AI deepfakes and the meddling issues with videos related to the elections? And do you worry that this won't be done close to real time as the election rolls ahead?
I am worried. I'm worried because there was I think, kind of way out there effort by certain attorney generals that actually won in the Fifth Circuit to say the federal government shouldn't even have voluntary communications with social media companies, which I think would be a huge mistake. And I think the Supreme Court will shortly weigh in on this, and I hope and I believe they will say that would be an inappropriate ruling. So I think there was hesitancy from some of the lawyers. I think there has been concern from some of the social media companies that they may be attacked by the far right. I'm even concerned that some of our law enforcement, when I see some of the House Republican members attack the FBI with such vile, I would have never thought this would be coming out of the Republican Party that was traditionally supportive of law enforcement. I think that has caused a bit of a pause. The remarkable thing is, under President Trump, the system was actually working smoother. There was lots of communications. What was fresh in people's mind was the brutal way that Russia intervened in 2016, and again, promoting violence, promoting racial strife, in many cases having sites that had more followers, frankly, than the real sites, whether it was the Tennessee GOP or the Black Lives Matter site. So I think there's been a little bit of people have forgotten how vicious some of this intervention is, and I think there is some of this hesitancy amongst the social media companies and at times law enforcement. So we want to keep the pressure on. I think public pressure is important. I was happy to hear the testimony from the Director of National Intelligence, the head of CISA, and the FBI yesterday. I think those communications are getting better. I was glad to see the CIA quickly shoot down this Russian effort to discredit our support for Ukraine. But we're going to have to remain vigilant for the next 170 odd days.
Senator, our next question is Raven Brown with WWBT.
Hey, Senator. Hope you're doing well. I have a question regarding the mail issues that we've been talking about for several months now. So we know that a bunch of senators sent a letter to the Postmaster General to pause planned changes to its processing and delivering network that could slow down mail delivery. I wanted to get an update on the status of that. Are you hearing anything? And also, the Office of Inspector General did release new data saying that Virginia is no longer the worst state when it comes to mail delivery, but it's still pretty bad. I think Georgia now is above Virginia. So are you seeing that it's getting a little bit better, and what improvements do you think we still need?
Well, thank you for the question. And this has been an enormous frustration to folks, not just in Richmond, but across Central Virginia. And I've been involved in a similar issue in Charlottesville now back 3 or 4 years. The not as bad as news as has been the fact that Virginia and Central Virginia is now third worst in the nation rather than worst. That's not much good news for folks who are waiting mail or need to make sure they mail in their bills at time or get their medicine on time. But I do know we have a commitment from the Postmaster General that this is going to get fixed. I'm a big believer in the old Ronald Reagan statement, trust but verify. So we are going to have another follow-up meeting 60 days after we had the last meeting, which was about 10 days ago. Some of the things that had exacerbated this problem during that November through February timeframe, such as the kind of independent going, frankly, broke, a couple of subcontractors that were doing parts of the transporting system. Those have been rectified. I think the staff training on using the new equipment has gone through, but we're going to stay on this until it is fixed. The folks in Central Virginia, took it on the chin for too long. It was a complete embarrassment that that region of our country ranked worst, and all of us from the congressional delegation are going to stay on this. The good news is the Postmaster General acknowledged that it had been a complete screw-up. Now it's our job to make sure we hold his feet to the fire and we get folks the service they deserve. I should also add that there are larger issues still around the Postal Service that we're going to have to grapple with. The old approach to the post office that this was a job that would bring you into the middle class. Unfortunately, salaries have not stayed up, and I know, for example, in Charlottesville, you got more immediate benefits if you went to work for Chick-fil-A than if you went to work for the post office. Now, if you stayed at the post office, the benefits kicked in, but we've got to stay competitive. And then we have the overall problem that people send just a lot less first-class mail. So much of our things we do online now that used to require first-class mail. So I'm strongly in support of giving the Postal Service the ability to do some new lines of business and frankly, to charge a fairer rate for some of the longer-term delivery services, the FedExes and the UPSs, who use the post office oftentimes for that last mile delivery. We see the FedEx trucks in the middle of urban areas, but that last mile, especially if it's far out, the Postal Service is often used, and I'm not sure they get fair compensation. So we're going to stay on this, and we'll have more to report, particularly when we have our next meeting with the Postmaster General.
Senator, our next question is Bill Atkinson with the Peters Progress Index.
Good afternoon, Senator. Always an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to speak with you. I have a couple of questions for you. I think we've now had a day to digest the apparent decision that the Presidential Commission debates will be shelved, most notably the one at Virginia State University in Ettrick. As I said, my question to you has two parts. One, given the years of skepticism from both parties about the process that the Presidential Debate Commission had been undertaking, were you surprised by the timing of the latest developments? And given the importance of a presidential debate at an HBCU, especially one that traditionally is a Democratic constituency, Would you encourage President Biden to appear at Virginia State on or around October 1st, if for nothing else, just to show that VSU is not being ignored by the party?
Well, thanks for good question, Bill. First of all, I think like virtually everybody, I was totally surprised by what happened yesterday. I mean, we normally have a debate about debates, and we have that at Senate levels, governor levels sometimes, obviously at the presidential level. So to say I was surprised was probably an understatement. And I don't think, at least talking to my fellow senators in both parties, I think everybody was totally surprised. And I tell you, Tim Kaine and I both have already weighed in on this online. We're both bitterly disappointed that would have been the first debate ever at an HBCU, and I can't think of a better one than Virginia State there in Petersburg, to do that debate. We haven't given up on trying to see if the second debate, they've obviously made the first one the decision to do it in a studio in Atlanta, but I still think the second debate, we're going to still push for VSU. And if for some reason that doesn't happen, I absolutely believe that it would be incumbent on President Biden to show up at VSU, to make his case on why he wants to be reelected. We know the president is going to Morehouse, another HBCU, to give a commencement address, I believe, this weekend. But VSU, had spent literally months and months and months, and I was proud to support their effort to try to win the ability to have the debate on their campus. And I haven't given up for the second debate, but I absolutely agree that if that second debate takes place in a studio as well, then the president needs to be at VSU during the next 170 days.
Senator, our next question is Rachel Tillebaugh with WSET.
Hi, Senator Warner. My question is kind of similar. It's about how former Speaker Pelosi just came out saying she would never recommend Biden debating Trump, but many agree that we need to hear both sides of what the candidates have to say. What's your stance on that?
Well, I think that was up to President Biden to make that decision. I think, frankly, campaigns are better served when they have a debate. I've debated my opponents in every campaign I've taken on. So I'm glad the American people are going to see the two candidates. I think one of the things that I believe will happen, because I don't think most Americans at this point or most Virginians are fully tuned in, and when they hear, unless there's a dramatic change from former President Trump, when they hear the rhetoric, the anger, the lack of any kind of plan of what Donald Trump wants to do for America if he was elected again to the president, as opposed to what most all of his speeches are about, which is his personal grievances and who he's angry at, and encouraging division, particularly against immigrants. I just don't think that's where the vast majority of Americans are at. So, I'm not going to weigh in on the. I'll let Nancy Pelosi and the Joe Biden campaign debate the debates, but I think at the end of the day, the American public will be well served. And I think as the American public focuses on literally the kind of rhetoric that's coming out of Donald Trump's mouth these days, that it won't be good for Donald Trump.
Senator, our final question is Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I know you've recently spoken with some mental health advocates across Virginia. I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about the importance of mental health and share some encouragement for those who might be on the fence about seeking out those professional mental health services.
Thank you for the question, Amy. And I think this was probably the case pre-COVID, but post-COVID, I don't think there is a family in America, including my own, that doesn't have some member that's struggling with mental health issues. I think it's particularly become so pervasive amongst young people. And candidly, as somebody that used to be in the cell phone business, I think some of that goes back to the introduction of smartphones back in 2012. When we have our young people glued to these devices as opposed to kind of interacting in the real world, it is hugely problematic. It's one of the reasons why we need the Kids Online Safety Bill that has over 60 co-sponsors in the Senate. The fact that we don't have any appropriate restrictions on especially younger children getting online is a huge, huge problem and leads greatly to the mental health challenges. On the good news front, I think there's a couple things we've done. We have put in place a nationwide suicide hotline where people who are in huge crisis mode, those lines in the past sometimes were not even answered on a timely basis. It has gotten much, much better. There's a single number now that people can call in. I visited some of the individuals in Virginia that provide those services in moments of crisis. I think that's good. I also think we had a hearing on this morning in the Finance Committee. One of the, with all the dark things that happened with COVID, one of the good things was it advanced the cause of telehealth a decade faster than it would have otherwise come about. Combine that with the fact that we now have enough resources to make sure that every home in Virginia has affordable, high-speed broadband, and you've got a new delivery model that I've heard from mental health clinicians actually, with some patients, may work better having that online communication, that Zoom consult, for folks that are unwilling to, go to a therapist's office or unwilling to kind of fully dive in. The ability to do this through Zoom is, I think, a tool that we can bring to bear. And on a at least indirect note, because so many times mental health issues can sometimes lead to substance abuse issues. We did have a bit of good news that we saw for the first time in 2023 a decline in overdose deaths in America. It was only a small decline, I think about 3%. But God willing, with the kind of federal and state and local experts who are trying to deal with substance abuse that, again, so often is tied to sometimes the mental health issues, I hope and pray that we're making some progress. But thank you, Amy, for asking that very, very important question.